Today's episode is sponsored by Republic Boot Company of Houston, Texas. Brad Boyer at Republic Boots recently made a pair of custom cowboy boots for my friend Ramblin' Jack Elliott. They're really beautiful and they're made out of blue leather. And Brad told me the reason Jack wanted that color is because the very first cowboy he saw when he was a kid in Brooklyn was wearing blue boots. Republic Boot Company can make you any kind of boot you want. You can place your order and find more information at republicbootcompany.com. I'd like to start today's show with a poem written by my old friend Dennis Gaines. Dennis was a well-loved Texas cowboy poet who cowboyed on the Matador Ranch in his younger years. I'm sad to say that Dennis just passed away on December 26th after a long battle with cancer. Back in 2005, Dennis gave me a framed copy of a poem that he wrote entitled To a Friend. The poem still hangs on my office wall, and I'd like to read it today in memory of Dennis. My trail is not that of the common herd. My dream is a story untold. A vain quest, perhaps, for a feeling, a word. This friend is my silver and gold. Far from the crush and the maddening throng, my burdens I carry alone. Mayhap I shall leave you an undying song or the rude common words on a stone. The troublesome cares of hearth and home extend not a welcome to me. My tablet, my bed is the range that I roam, and anonymous lands o'er the sea. The creak of the saddle, the roll of the ships, my writings are scribbled in sand. Unknown to me are childish lips or the strength in a good woman's hand. My signposts read always tomorrow, though truly I seek yesterday. But what time is not mortgaged we borrow and pray that we never repay. And yet through the smoke of my wanderings and the arcing of memories through years, through 1,000 forgettable ponderings, the triumphs have blotted the tears. For whenever my hoofprints weave and wend to the sun-streaked horizon's rim, I'll remember the warmth and the smile of a friend as the tracks of my passing grow dim. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is Barry Corbin. Barry is an actor who's appeared in countless movies and television shows, including Urban Cowboy, Northern Exposure, Lonesome Dove, and No Country for Old Men. This last summer, I had the opportunity to work on stage with Barry at the National Ranching Heritage Center here in Lubbock. Barry was portraying Charlie Goodnight, and I was interviewing him on stage in the role of J. Evetts Haley. We sat down the next day and recorded this interview. Here's Barry Corbin.
I was born in Lamesa, Texas, 1940, in October, in the fall of the year. And my first home, and I don't remember this very well, but was out in McCarty, Texas, which was a cotton gin and two houses on two sides of the road. It's out toward Lubbock, on the highway toward Lubbock. What is that, 84, I believe. And
87.
87. When you leave Lamesa, it's the first settlement, which is not really much of a settlement. It's cotton gin, one house over here, one house across the road. And we lived in the house across the road from the gin. So that was, my mother and dad were teaching in Hancock School out there, which was a little country school. And my dad taught history, and he was also the principal of the school. And at the time, he was 21 years old. And he decided he was going to run for county judge because we were about to get into the war. We weren't quite there. Of course, Pearl Harbor didn't happen until 41. I'd already passed my first birthday then. They'd always thought we were going to get in the war by all the people down there in Dawson County. So guys were joining the Army, trying to get a head up on the Axis over there in Europe. So when my dad had polio when he was a kid, so his right hand was shriveled and crippled. So he was out of the war. He couldn't get in there, and he wanted to join the FBI, but they wouldn't have him because he couldn't fire a pistol. So he decided he was going to run for county judge. Well, the guy that was the judge was an old lawyer who had been around for years, and he was kind of losing it in his mind. And so my dad ran for county judge and darned if he didn't win. So he was the county judge at 22 years old. Served 2 terms, and then he ran for state senator. Went on from there, and by that time we moved to Lubbock. So I went through the first grade in Lamesa. My memories of Lamesa are not too big, but there was a man on the corner of the road down about a block from our house. Ran a service station. He had a service station and a grocery store. He had a Charlie McCarthy dummy, and he'd put him up and make him talk, and he wasn't as good a ventriloquist as Edgar Bergen. Edgar Bergen wasn't really a very good ventriloquist because he made his living being a ventriloquist on the radio. So he could move his mouth as much as he wanted to. And so Ernie Barrett was the man's name that had the grocery store. So he'd just sit up there and talk, and move the dummy's mouth. Well, that was enough for us. We didn't care. And then there's little friends behind the store there, and we'd have clod fights all the time. Sometimes we'd get a clod up, have a rock in it, really hurt you. So that was mainly our entertainment, hurting each other. I went to first grade, and then we moved to Austin, and I went to second grade at Travis Heights Elementary School in Austin. Then we moved to Lubbock, and that's a big town, compared to everything else around here. Of course, Lubbock and Amarillo had a big rivalry back then. Still do, I suppose. But now Tech's going to open a large animal veterinarian school up in Amarillo. So I guess we're going to get some peace now. My first interest in it came when the old B Westerns were showing in Lamesa. I'd go to the movies on Saturday. Our folks would give us a quarter to go to the movies, and we'd go to the movies and pay 7 cents to get in, and then pay a nickel for popcorn and a nickel for a Coca-Cola. So we'd 7 cents, and we'd spend 17 cents. So we'd have another 8 cents to spend on candy if we wanted to in the movie, or we could save it and go buy some penny candy over at the drugstore after the movie was over. So we'd normally do that. We'd play guns and cowboys and Indians. Most of us wear those little cap pistols when we go to the movie. when they'd have the bad fights at the end, we'd start pumping off caps, making noise. And I always thought, well, I could do that. I could really do that, make a living doing it. And I guess basically I never grew up. But I decided to do it, and that's the way I went. But then I branched out, of course, later on into the classics and theater more than movies. I didn't get really into movies until I was nearly 40.
Was that a difficult transition from the stage to film?
Not really. Once I got into it, the difficult transition was moving from New York to Hollywood and then getting sort of known. It took a little while to do that. I came out in 1977 and did my first movie in 1979. I kept having to go back and do regional theater. I went back and did one off-Broadway show in New York, and then in 1979, I got cast in a movie called Urban Cowboy, which was a pretty big hit at the time. I played a big part in that, and then I did another movie called Stir Crazy, which was another good-sized part, playing the warden in a prison, and then I did Any Which Way You Can, which came out close at the same time. So these three movies came out, and I was playing kind of different parts in each one. And during that time also, I got the part of playing the sheriff in Dallas. So that was not a regular role, but a recurring part. So there was 4 different parts. So that kind of kicked me off, and then I went on to do a lot of other, mainly movies. Sometimes I'd do a television show, I'd do a miniseries or something, but I did mainly movies during the 80s. And then toward the end of the 80s, I started doing more television. Got to be a regular in some of those shows. Some of them didn't last, There was one that Earl Hamner did. He did the Waltons, which was a big hit for him. And he wrote one called Boone, which was kind of based on kind of a fictionalized deal like the birth of rock and roll, where Boone character was kind of like Elvis, His dad ran a service station in a garage, and his mother was homemaker, and I played his dad in the thing. That lasted about, 8 or 10 episodes, and then they canceled it. And I did some more pilots, different things, and finally I ended up in one called Northern Exposure, which lasted 5 seasons, I guess, 5 or 6 seasons. So that was that took us up until 95, and then I moved away from Hollywood and went to Texas. I got tired of putting up with aggravation in Hollywood, so I left. I decided I wasn't working there that much anyway, so I might just as well live in the middle of the country where I could be comfortable. People tend to be more polite here in Texas. I think it comes from, we're not too far from, but you can't ever tell who's got a gun here, so you got to be nice to each other. You can't just cuss each other out and expect no consequences. So.
I keep thinking about you starting in the Shakespearean plays and that world, and then now in your acting career, it seems you've earned a reputation as playing Western characters, and I'm curious if you see a correlation between those two traditions and
Well,
those two worlds.
the theater, you have a wider, you can play a wider range of characters. In film, especially once you get known, your audience wants to see you, wants to see the person that they perceive you to be. And like I was telling some young people today, you're going to get typed. You're going to get typecast. So the best thing to do is typecast yourself in the widest possible variety. You know, so that's kind of what I did. I kind of went for being, you know, kind of a little bit country, but you know, with a little bit of sophistication on top of it. And, you know, I try to stay within that realm. I sometimes step out of it, and when I do, I get mail that people don't like me. You know, I did a thing called Thornbirds, where I played an Australian foreman of a sheep station, and did it with a kind of an Irish accent. They didn't want an Australian. And so I did that, and then I got people writing me letters like I'd been conning them all this time by playing this guy with it. It was from Texas, but you know, that's, you know, you can occasionally break out of it a little bit, but if you break out of it too much, it'll come back and bite you. It's like somebody once said of Spencer Tracy, said he always plays himself. And Spencer Tracy says, well, who the hell should I play? Gable? And Clark Gable always wanted to break out and be a character actor. And whenever he did, his movies would be a failure because people expected him to be the romantic lead, you know, the dashing kind of guy. So people have certain expectations of you, and if you disappoint them for that in that expectation, then they sometimes don't like it. You know, sometimes the guy playing the bad guy, if he plays a bad guy convincingly, they won't let him play a hero because it'll confuse the audience. Right when Richard Widmark started out in the movies, he always played a psychotic killer. And it took him probably 10 years to break out of that and get into being a leading man. Another example would be Ernie Borgnine. He played these killers, you know, like this guy, the guy Fatso in From Here to Eternity, where he kills Frank Sinatra's character, and he's a sadistic sergeant in the Army. And people thought he couldn't play anything else. And then he gets a part like Marty, who's just a kind of a Bronx butcher who's kind of an ugly guy, and then he's looking for a girlfriend, but not too hard, and then he finally finds him a girl, and they fall in love. But he's a romantic lead in that movie. That helped his career because he won an Academy Award for it. But if he hadn't played it that well, people would still think of him as old Fatso and From Here to Eternity, one of those mean guys, you know. Which he played after that too. He'd go back and forth, play all kinds of things. And I try to model my career on that, where one thing you're playing a heavy, and one of them you're playing a nice guy, and one of them you're playing kind of a hero. And, you know, if you can do that, you can move back and forth, and that's the best of all worlds, you know. And when I got to Hollywood, I knew that I had to fit in somewhere. I couldn't just be whatever they were calling for, because they had those guys all over. I was sent in by my agent one time to audition for a part of Moses in a commercial. And he said, said, go buy yourself a beard at the costume shop that hangs over your ears, and, and put that beard on, white beard, and go in there. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. So I went in there just as me, went in for the audition. And there was this man in there who I later got to know. He was wearing robe and big old long robe down to his ankles, and had a big bushy beard, long hair, and was carrying a staff. He was about 60 years old, I guess. Had a beard was gray and long gray hair, carrying that staff. And he looked like Moses. So I thought, well, there's no point in me being here. So I just left. I didn't even go in there. But I think he got the part. I'm not sure, because the commercial was in Japan. So they dubbed his voice in Japanese. All he had to do was look like Moses. And I figured, well, I don't look like that, so I'd just well go. Sometimes you do that. Sometimes you'll walk in and you see some guy that, oh, he's perfect for it. And then if you stay, you might get the part because you misread what they want, So you don't usually walk out like that. But if a guy comes in wearing a robe and a beard and they're casting for Moses, you might just well leave.
In talking about art and the creative process, singer-songwriter Andy Wilkinson has said this: "Creativity is not what is made or produced, but rather is the making, the process. Hence, process has primacy over product, meaning that putting product first removes, ignores, or bypasses creativity."
Well, when I get a script, the first thing I do is I read the script as a whole, just as a story. And then I look at it from the viewpoint of the character that that they're thinking about me for. I'll read it for that, just seeing how my character, the character they're talking about me for, fits into the plot and the story. If he's off on some kind of a tangent, there's a good chance that he's going to be cut out of the script. And so, and that's not necessarily a reason to turn it down, because they're going to pay you anyway. But but usually what you want to do is see where you fit within the plot. Then you read it specifically to see what the character beats are, what the points in the script that your character changes. If he doesn't change some way, you don't want to do it probably. He might change for the better, he might change for the worse, but there's got to be some kind of a change in there. I work from the outside in. I try to figure out what the guy looks like. And I try to make him look as much like me as I can. And I try to make him sound as much like me as I can. If I'm playing somebody from New York, you don't sound like me, so you can sound like somebody from New York. What was his background? How did he get the way he is? Did he have an easy childhood or a difficult childhood? It depends on all that. So you analyze it in that way, and eventually it comes in and you internalize it. It's like the play we did last night. When I don't know if you noticed, but when I started putting on the costume, I started changing a little bit. And when I put on the beard and the wig, all those things. I changed more. I physically changed. And by the time I got everything on, I was much older. I wasn't acting like I was old and feeble. I was, because I'd put it in my mind, okay, now I'm 93 years old. What is difficult for a 93-year-old man to do? Number one, it's hard for him to sit down. It's hard for him to get up. It's hard for him to climb steps. And the cane, he's not using the cane for effect. He's using it to maintain his balance, because his balance is off. And then this particular old man, he's a particular one. He's different from other old men because he spent his years in the saddle. He spent his younger years working hard. So that physically has got to manifest itself. And all this stuff has got to be put in your subconscious rather than your conscious, because if it's in your conscious, you're thinking about that. And same thing about, we talked the other day, the thinking about lines. If you're thinking about your lines, you're not thinking what you need to be thinking. What you need to be thinking is, what is my objective here? What am I trying to do? Sometimes you're not saying what you're trying to do. Sometimes you're saying something else, but your undercurrent is what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to convince somebody of. For example, in our situation, I was trying to convince the people in the back to buy my buffalo, to buy my meat, my robes, my skin, all these things. While I'm doing that, I'm also engaged with you because you are interviewing me for something that's very important to me. It's important to you, but it's more important to me because it's getting my story out into the public world, so people know and understand why I did what I did, why I was who I was. It's like Goodnight said at one time. He said, "I carried a gun when I needed one. When law came to the land, I quit carrying it." So he was. Now that's not to say he wasn't armed sometime, but he didn't feel like he'd feel undressed without it if he went into the courthouse or something. So he was, you've got to take in those considerations. What would a man who always, from the time he was 15 until he was 60, always had a heavy revolver on his hip. That'd affect him if suddenly it's not there. If he takes it away. So that would affect him. And any little thing that you can think of to particularize that particular person, make him an individual rather than just a general somebody, it's important to do. So that's my preparation. Another person's preparation might be some mystical changing of their whole being, I mean, I know people that feel like they've got to become a character. Well, you don't have to do that, but you have to, in your mind, it's sort of a self-hypnosis deal. You've got to, in your mind, if you put yourself in the mind of the character, usually you can't go wrong because you're going to react the way that person would react. So if you're thinking about technical things, then you're going to, if you forget a line, you don't know what to do. Or if somebody drops something, you don't know what to do. But if you're playing the person that you're playing, then you automatically respond in a logical way. That's basically it. Basically what it is, James Cagney said it pretty succinctly. He said, walk in, plant your feet, and tell the truth. So that's a lot easier said than done, but that's basically what it is.
That's good songwriting advice too.
Yeah.
In the cowboy world, Barry Corbin is noted for his portrayal of Charlie Goodnight in the one-man play Charlie Goodnight's Last Night, written by Andy Wilkinson. I asked Barry what made him want to portray Goodnight.
Basically, the things he accomplished with very little help. He had 2 terms in school, which means he went in the fall and the winter, 1 year. That's all he had in school. But he became, by a lot of people's view, a very accomplished botanist and an animal breeder and a student of nature. He did that without a lot of book learning, although he did read. He was curious, but he also had a very strong moral sense. He didn't stray from. If somebody rustled cattle, for example, they'd hang them. I mean, that's what you did. And according to his code, the person they hang would understand that. It was not malicious, a malicious thing. It wasn't being mean. It was following the civilized rule that all people should understand. And people didn't, and a lot of people did understand it and chose to ignore it. But he never varied from his moral viewpoint, which I think is something that's admirable and very difficult to do. I think today, in our society, I think it's almost impossible to do. I think some people can almost do it, but there've got to be compromises because we're living on top of each other. In his time, he was like a lot like Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone, if somebody got within 10 miles of where he was living, he'd move west. The last time he moved, he was in his 80s. He never would have anybody within 10 miles of him. Now, he would have a community, but he was the patriarch of the community. And if that didn't suit everybody, he'd just pick up and move. So that was the kind of thing you either had to compromise or move on. And the ones that moved on became, I think they were probably in the autism spectrum. They couldn't adjust to other people's points of view. I think probably Goodnight was. I think probably more people. Now it's being diagnosed now, and since we're so crowded, it becomes a very serious problem because people are bombarded with information. And one of the things about autism is that that you can only take in so much information. I mean, if it comes in too quick, it puts you in a panic. And so you don't, with all the stimuli we have now, these kids who are in that spectrum, which may be more than 50%, just cannot adjust to it. It's going to be a bigger problem than it is now. Goodnight, Boone, Crockett less than the other ones because he was a very social person. He had to have people, but he also had to have solitude. He would leave and go on extended hunting trips by himself. He had to have the solitude, which Goodnight had to have. Goodnight would go away from everybody, and for periods of time, he'd ride out to the Paladura Canyon and wouldn't talk to anybody until he solved the problem, till he settled it in his mind. And he might listen to advice, but very rarely would he take it without running it through his own mind to make sure that that's what he wanted to do. That's one of the things I admired about him. There's so many things I admired about the Manns, which is why I wanted to play that part.
In an introduction to a book entitled Voices and Visions of the American West, Western writer Elmer Kelton said this about the image of the cowboy. Many people view the cowboy as a romantic, exotic figure bigger than life, almost like something out of Sir Walter Scott's stories of chivalry and knighthood. On the other hand, his detractors declare him just another hired hand who happens to spend part of his time on horseback, his existence grubby, menial, and generally unpleasant. At either extreme, he borders on the mythical.
Well, I think we're all products of our environment. No matter where you're from, you're shaped by what's around you. I think there are values in. It's not only in this part of the country. I think it's a peculiarly American value. We prefer to be rugged individuals. We prefer to solve our own problems, to take care of any difficulties we have. It's it's what John Wayne said. I'm not sure he said it or somebody wrote it for him, but he said courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway. I think that's a particularly American way of thinking, and I think we all would like to be that person. Most of us fail, but most of us have an ideal in our mind of what the perfect person is. The perfect person is the guy that comes in and takes care of the problem, expects no help from anybody else, expects no gratitude, and expects no pay, just takes care of the problem, and then goes to the next one. That's what we all aspire to, I think, but very few of us do it. Very few of us make it. I don't know. I remember when at Ben Johnson's funeral up in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, I came out and there was an old cowboy holding his hat in his hands. Outside the burial was under a tent, and I came out from under the tent. And this really struck me, and it scared me. He said, "Barry," and he knew me he knew who I was. He said, Barry, who's going to take care of the cowboys now? I said, I don't know. I have no idea, but we just lost somebody whose boots are going to be real hard to fill. And he says, I guess you'll have to do it. I think maybe that is what motivates me to try to preserve the Western philosophy, if that's what it is. It's not a philosophy, it's a way of living. And I think it's worth preserving.
The first time I ever saw Barry Corbin was in the 1991 movie Conagher. The movie stars Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross and is based on the novel written by Louis L'Amour. Barry plays the part of the stagecoach driver Charlie McLeod.
That was an interesting job because I got it kind of at the last minute, and I didn't. They called and offered it to me. They'd already started shooting the movie. They said they'd wanted me to be a stagecoach driver, and I read the script, and it was a very nice character. I mean, obviously the guy had feelings of protection and also attraction to the widow out there, but he didn't. He didn't know how to act on it. But he did have I wouldn't say it was a romantic feeling, but certainly a feeling of kinship and wanting to help and wanting to do something for her. I said, well, yeah, I'd love to do it because I'd worked with Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross produced it. I'd worked with them before. And they'd hired a director who was a cinematographer on Urban Cowboy, Ray Villalobos. I knew Ray, and I thought, well, it'd be fun to do this. And I got out to the location first day, and I thought I was going out just to meet with everybody. And, I wasn't working that day when I landed, but they took me out to the set, which was out on a ranch in Colorado. The head wrangler, I guess he was stunt coordinator or whatever, R.L. Tolbert said, you do drive a six-up, right? And I said, well, I've driven two. That's as much as I've done. He said, no, you're driving six horses in this movie, and we don't have a place for a blind driver. So when you're driving, you're driving. He said, we'll have a driver on the riding shotgun with you. When you're driving, you're driving. I said, oh, Lord. And I said, how long do I have? And he said, 3 days. I said, okay, let's go. And I was thinking, he said, you ride horses, so you know horses, so it shouldn't be too bad. And I was thinking, well, if a guy rides a motorcycle, that doesn't mean he can drive an 18-wheeler. That is not logical. But anyway, I learned to drive in 3 days. First day we were going up the hill, somebody had parked the hay wagon over here to the right, and I had to turn to the left to go stop in front of the cabin. They had 3 cameras working. And so the lead horses started going toward that hay wagon, and I started pulling the line, grabbing the line, pulling it back. Pretty soon the horses started going back this way, and they come up, and I looked over the lead horse's ears, and I saw the one of the cameramen was standing right against the wall of the cabin. He wasn't looking through the viewfinder. He was looking over the camera because I was headed right for him. We turned and I stopped, got on the mark, did my first line, and that was that. We got it. And then Ray said, okay, let's do one for safety. I said, wait a minute, did we get that? He said, yeah. And I said, well, I can't do another one. And so we just had to use what we had. But they put Louis L'Amour's daughter in the coach. Angelique L'Amour was in the coach when I first drove it up that hill. And a couple other actors were in there. So I was terrified I was going to wreck the coach or kill Louis L'Amour's daughter or something. But it worked out fine. It was a great movie to work on, because it was really like being in the old times. I'd sit on a horse most of the day, and when it came time to drive the coach, I'd get up in the box and go. I could probably still drive one if I could climb up and get in the box to do it, but I don't think I can climb up there anymore.
There was not time to ask Barry about every movie he's worked on. So in addition to asking about Conagher, I asked him what it was like to work with the Coen Brothers in the 2007 film No Country for Old Men.
They always had a very detailed illustrations that they'd have an artist draw, and so they had an artist draw a picture of Ellis, the character I played, and he had a big long handlebar mustache, no beard. He had one eye that was white. It was like it would, and a scar through here and stuff. And I said, I think that I can play this without putting a contact in my eye, and let's just, we don't need all that makeup because that's just distracting. Really, I didn't want to put a contact in my eye, but I said, it'd be better to act if I got both my eyes there. So they agreed, said okay. They called me in they wanted me to rehearse about 3 weeks before I was going to shoot it. I think really it was an audition, but they called me in to rehearse with Tommy Lee in Santa Fe. And so I flew up to Albuquerque and went to Santa Fe, and then we just ran through the scene, Tommy and I did, in the ballroom, and then they said, okay, well, let's go to lunch. That's it. That's all we need. So I went away and did another movie. Then I come back, and I'm supposed to be in Marfa, Texas, on, I think, Thursday. And I had in my schedule, and I was scheduled to shoot on this other movie Thursday. So what they did, they agreed to shoot me out, finish me on Thursday at noon in Kansas. And then I'd have to go all the way back to Kansas City and fly into El Paso and drive about 4.5 or 5 hours to Marfa. So that put me in at about the time I had to go to work. And so the Coen Brothers rented a plane, had me flown out of Dighton, Kansas, and landing in a little grass runway airport in Marfa, put me up, and the next morning I went out to this awful shack out in the country, and there were all these cats that they brought in, because the character I was playing had a bunch of stray cats that he had in the house, you know. There were rattlesnakes under the floor of this cabin, this little old house. And I told the women who brought the cats out, I said, don't let any of these cats get out of here, because if you do, you'll never see them again. And if you ever watch the movie again, you watch Tommy Lee walk in the front door, there's a cat just runs right past him, right out the door. Never saw that cat again. That is it. Anyhow, we did it. We did the scene. We did it all, mainly all of it in one day. The next day I came out and we did a couple of pickups, and then that was it. I was scheduled to be driven to El Paso to fly back to Fort Worth, and I was done. But they'd never said anything to us. What they'd do is, in the scenes, they'd whisper to each other. After the scene was cut, they'd whisper to each other, and they'd say, let's do it again. And then they'd cut, okay, whisper to each other some more, and then let's do it again. They'd do it 3 or 4 times, and then they'd say, okay, print, let's move. And they'd move the lights around. We'd set up another shot, another angle. They never said anything to either one of us, to me or Tommy Lee. And Tommy Lee was getting nervous because he, you know, they weren't talking to us. So after we got done, the next day I said, Joel, I said, do you guys give anybody direction? And he said, well, if we cast it right, we don't have to. Well, I kind of rehearsed one earlier today. It's a little piece of Shakespeare, because the guy said, I can't imagine you doing Shakespeare with your West Texas accent. I did it. I did a piece. And I'll do that one for you. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and each man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in his nurse's arms. Then the schoolboy, with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail, unwillingly to school. Then the lover, sighing like a furnace with a woeful ballad writ to his mistress' eyebrow. Then the soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden, quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. Then the justice, in fair round belly with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The next age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose, pouch on side. His youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in its sound. The next age of all, the last one, is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans taste, sans eyes, sons, everything.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Barry Corbin for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about Barry at barrycorbin.com. I'd like to thank Republic Boot Company for sponsoring today's episode. You can find out more about Republic Boots at republicbootcompany.com. You can find out more about me and this show at andyhedges.com. If you're enjoying this show and would like to help me keep it going, you can make a donation on my website. Or you could take the time to leave a rating and review on the iTunes store. Or you could simply tell a friend to listen to the show. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.